intro about you, and then we're going to jump into who you are and why you're here today. So Jonaed is someone who actually has a company named NoDegree.com. However, Jonaed does have a degree in actuarial science. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you got from having a degree in actuarial science, what that means being an actuary, and how you got to having this company called NoDegree.com. So tell us just a little bit about you.
Yeah, I mean, so I started NoDegree.com because I wanted to help people without college degrees find meaningful careers that pay well. And within my own journey, it's varied, right? Because people ask me like, "Oh, you have a college degree. Why'd you sort of start?" And it was mainly because it's not like I didn't like work. It's just that that part of work wasn't necessarily fulfilling for me. Like I'm more of an entrepreneur, right? Some people like stability. I'm a big dreamer. So for me, like you at a company, it's very hard to sort of implement your own ideas because there's a lot of structures in place, right? I would have probably been more suited at a startup, and I did work for a startup, and that was where I felt more alive. So that's kind of why I did that, and it just kind of grew from there. It started as an idea 6 years ago
What's
in a base.
the no degree, your no degree
Yeah,
idea?
yeah. So it started like 6, 7, I forget, like 6, 7 years ago, and it started 6 years ago. It started in a basement, bunch of guys just kind of talking, and then now it's here where it's like this is what I do full time. This is how I make my living, and I'm really happy I'm able to do what I want.
So what do you do? What's the it that you do?
So I do a lot of things career related. So on nodegree.com, I'll have a lot of career related articles like how do you become XYZ. And even though it is nodegree.com, the advice is relevant, like how to interview. It doesn't matter whether you have a degree or not. I focus on how to interview. I have a podcast called the No Degree Podcast where I interview people without college degrees and have them share their stories. And even then, a lot of the careers, it's like, how do you become a graphic designer? How do you become an entrepreneur? How do you get into this industry? How do you work in sales? Right. And these are people who make very good money just coming from different backgrounds, because I like helping others just figure out, because and you're going to see that even people have all different types of backgrounds. People have all different types of skill set. They have all different types of experiences, and that leads to them getting into what they their careers. So I just like helping people, and kids, teenagers, people of all ages kind of understand, like, it's okay, you're going to have a different story, but it's okay, take some learning things and use it to get to wherever you want to be.
So you talk about interviewing.
Yeah.
And as somebody who I've done a ton of interviews
Yeah.
in throughout my career, and so I'm wondering, is there an interview that you can think of that you've had in your life, and was that an impetus at all to do this, or things that you learned through a particular interview that maybe went well or didn't
Yeah,
even go?
so I used to be an actuary, and I used to work at MetLife. And for those of you who don't know what an actuary is, they're the ones who come up with insurance prices. So it's a lot of math. Like, how do you charge for car insurance in Chicago if your car is red and you're a 22-year-old male, right? Versus if you're a 54-year-old female, right? They're different prices. They have different risk factors and all
Because
that.
the 22-year-old's car insurance, or the 18-year-old or the 16-year-old, like our audience, that amount of money that I know I pay for my kids' car insurance is way more than the 50-year-olds, right?
Yeah, unless that 50-year-old has a lot of crashes, so you never know.
Okay.
There's some reckless 50-year-olds out there. So, what you ask? Interviews. Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
for interviews, I had an interview, and I remember actuarial science is very competitive to get in. It's one of those industries, like your first internship or your first job is super hard to get in. Once you get it, it's easy, and you're gonna find a lot of people like that. Once you get your first great job, after that, it's so much easier, right? Because then they just have this idea of you. It's just easier to get in the door, right? A lot of times getting to the interview is the hardest part. So I had this interview, and I only had like one interview. I had like two interviews, but the other one I wasn't qualified for, and I prepped a lot. And my business partners they gave me like two, 3 mock interviews. And since they knew me, when I answered a question, they're like, "Hey, this is a good answer, but what about that experience? What about that? Or, I think you could say it this way." And when I went and I practiced saying my answers out loud, and when I went to the interview and I asked for feedback, I got the job, and they said I was the best interviewer that they had. And, because I talked to the people, and it just showed how that made such a big difference. It's like a small thing. A lot of people don't practice saying their answers out loud. So the first time that they're saying it is in the interview. And what ends up happening is in your head, you say one thing and it's perfect. And then when you come out, it's like,
Totally.
there was a time when, no, the actual real time, but this is what happened. And it just ends up looking bad on you because if they compare you to someone else who's more prepped, they're just going to think better things of them.
So you practiced with some of your who were your friends at the time. They're your business partners now.
Yeah.
But you practiced the questions. How did you do that? Did you give them questions to ask you? Did you have like how did you even know what questions to ask?
So I mean, I did my own research, but one of my business partners, he's about like 10 years older than me, so he has interviewed people in the past. But it's a typical like tell me about yourself, and a lot of interviewing is knowing what you bring to the table. Like, what experiences did you have? Name a time when you had conflict. How did you solve a problem? What's your accomplishment? What do you want to do? What are your career goals? I mean, these are things you should know anyway. It's just in an interview, they have to come across as very polished.
So you practiced,
Yeah.
and you practiced with people. By the way, for our students who are watching, when you go through your sessions today, you're going to get a reflection form. And Jonaed, we're going to do a raffle, is going to work with 3 students either on interviewing skills or resume writing. So Jonaed, thank you also for doing that. I want to plug that right now
Yeah,
for
I'm
our
excited.
audience.
Yeah,
I know, right? Because you do this, and you do this right now with lots of you. I think you told me over 800 people you've worked with.
I mean, I've done over like 800 quick reviews. I've worked over 100 people intensely. I've done over 800 hours of like resume writing / interview prep this year, and I would have done more. It's just I have 2 businesses, so that's why it's like that's why I don't do as much now. But I used to do a lot of resumes every month.
Is there a common theme or mistake or something that you see that's a simple thing that individuals, for our students who are applying for jobs or starting to build their resumes might be thinking about avoid these?
You know what? I
this
think
all the
a
time.
lot of people really downplay what they do. So they'll be like, hey, I'm a cashier, and that's all they'll write. But it's like, how many customers do you interact with? How much money do you handle? What else do you do? What other issues do you solve? And you'd be surprised. It's like, hey, I work with, I process like 200 plus transactions that are totaling like, I don't know, $20,000 daily, right? So again, yes, it's just a cashier, but be able to talk about what you did. Like, don't downplay yourself that, I was never a cashier. Yeah, I was a cashier, but I did all these jobs, and it's like, those were the stepping stones to get the next job, right? And in your interview, you deal with conflict, right? You deal with customers, you deal with your boss, you deal with the issues in the workplace, you try to figure out how to do things better, right? Really don't downplay yourself and try to communicate it to the best of your ability. And the other thing is, people try to make resumes art projects, and when you're applying online, it's like, these computers, they have trouble scanning these art projects, right? It's like art is very hard to scan, right? Unless you have like complex AI. So make it simple. Just realize that someone's only looking at your resume maybe 7 to 20 seconds on average. So make it easy for them to absorb. Make them look at, boom, okay, this is Dr. Stacey Gonzales. She does XYZ. Boom, I want to call. Because most people don't even read your full resume. They read a few lines and then they figure out whether or not they want to call you. And that's just, unfortunately, when you have like 100, 200 to look at, they're just not going to spend that much time on your resume.
So adding some numerical data, I'm wondering, does that come from your actuarial math background, right?
A little.
Trying to put some descriptors in numerical form around what you've done. That was a great example with the cashier. Where were you a cashier?
I used to work at a Starbucks. It's not a Starbucks, but it's the Barnes & Noble's cafe serving Starbucks coffee. So just make drinks and all that stuff. That was an interesting, fun job.
What was interesting? Were there anything that stands out to you, or any moments in that job? Like, if you could go back to yourself looking at where you're at now and think about how you were then.
No, I was always a dreamer and stuff. And, it was like I was a decent worker. I wasn't necessarily the best worker in that, just because I knew that's not what I wanted to do in the future. But I learned a lot about interacting with people. It helped communicate. Just like being friendly goes a long way, and having people remember you. I'm still friendly with the people that I worked with. So like a couple of people, I saw them. So it's just cool to I think one advice I would have is just be friendly with people. You just never know where it can lead to, and how your roads cross, and how you can benefit them in the future, or how they can benefit you.
Yeah, and I think you're really good at that, right? So that's how we know each other,
Yeah,
from building a social connection.
yeah.
And so what do you think that you do differently, or how do you become intentional about that? Especially I think when we were talking and prepping for this, you were sharing with me that you weren't always really outgoing, and that
Yeah.
wasn't
I mean,
who you were.
I was I was a shy kid until like my senior year is like when I really did, really blew out of my shell. And it was just because it's like I stopped like caring. Like in high school, you really care what other people think. And I'm not saying don't care at all, right? There's an extreme of not caring to the point where it's detrimental to you, but don't let it ruin who you are, because who you are is very important. And I think you're gonna see that, especially when I was in high school, like if you watched anime, you're like a loser. Now it's like a big thing. So like if you like something, just kind of own it. Like people make fun of you, but it's like at the end of the day, that's more of a reflection on them, and it's not you. That if you like something, you enjoy something, that's a part of you. Don't let it stop you. Like I've seen people who are like judged for because they were doing other things, right? And now it's a big part of who they are, and now they're successful. Whereas like, you'd be surprised that I've seen people who are great students who did not end up doing well, some people who are bad students who turned it around. And it's just like in general, it helps to be a good student just because you have more flexibility, but just realize that you're going to change as a person, right? I'm not the person I was 10 years ago. I'm not the person I was even 5 years ago or even last year, right? And it's like you're always going to change, and just the changes is a part of life, and just take your experiences and carry it forward.
And you're pretty young. You're not that far removed from high school. You
Yeah, I
right?
mean, I hit my 10-year reunion last year, earlier last year, not this year's Corona, but last
Did
year.
you go to your 10-year reunion?
Yeah, I went.
And what was that like?
It was cool because you really see how people change, right? There were some people you're like, I thought you were going to be a doctor, and they're like in the arts. And then you see some people who you're like, wow, you're on the business side. So it's just, and then some people you're like, oh, you're exactly who I expected you to be. Some people don't change, and you're like, wow, you didn't change in high school. And then some people really grow, but you're going to see it's just so much variation.
And you kind of said were you into anime in high school?
No, I was not.
No, you were not. What were you
Yeah.
into? What were you into in high school?
So I was the captain of my wrestling team. So I'm still in. So I'm an assistant wrestling coach. So that's a big part of who I am. And again, like it's not surprising. I'm still friends with my high school coach, and he's still exactly the same guy he was 10 years ago, which is kind of funny. So that was me. I used to read a lot, and I still read a lot just because it's like that's how I learn, right? I learn from a lot of people's experiences, and that's how I started my company. Like I looked at random comments on like Reddit where people are like, hey, XYZ, this is what I did. And I figured out, okay, I can apply this to my business. And oh, this doesn't make sense. And I just kind of take a lot from others.
Is there anything that you wish you would have learned in high school that you know now that
I,
you wish you would have known then?
I think I would have started networking even more, just because a lot of people, even adults, don't really know what networking is, right? You're going to see, and especially as you grow older, that your friends grow apart and all that. And it's so easy because you get caught up in work, you get caught up in projects, that it's so easy to not talk to someone for years at a time. And the thing is, I'm only here where I am today, like by keeping in touch with the people who are close to me. Like I've had a connection who gave me a Facebook ad course that was like 100 hours long. That was like a couple $1,000s. And it was his brother's course. So I got it for free. So there's so many things that I got for free purely by coincidence, right? And it's not because I tried and I kept in touch with them because I knew they were going places. It was more just I was their friend. I kept in touch, and I've helped a lot of people too. Like there were some people who, like my friend from elementary school, I'm helping him with his interview, and he got an interview at like Sony Music, right? And it was just these type of things. Like I wasn't friends with him saying, hey, one day I'll help you get an interview. But we just always kept in touch, and that's how life is. It's like the more you put yourself out there, the more things happen. Like I met my mentor at a networking event, right? And now she's given me advice that I probably would have to pay 10 to 20,000 plus for, but I get it for free. But I also help her out, right? I help her out in her own instance and all that.
That's a good point. I was just reading something. There's some sort of think it's like a Chinese saying that basically what goes up must come down.
Yeah.
And so this idea of sometimes we're going to put something out there, we're going to make these connections, and they're going to come back to us, but they might not necessarily come back to us from the people we think they're going to come from, or where they're going to come from. So kind of back to your not Starbucks example, right? Like you put out being friendly, you put out networking and connecting with people in authentic ways, which is how we became connected, right? We connected on LinkedIn, and then planning this virtual career day. At some point, there was this idea for a keynote, and you immediately popped into my mind as the person who I thought would really be able to share some cool stuff and really make an impact for our kids. Do you think that there's a way in which that happened, or why that happened?
I mean, I try not to think too much about it. It's just you put yourself out there and things will happen, and you really, there's no like formula like, hey, if you do this XYZ, this is exactly what's going to happen, right? My business has pivoted. Like if you last year, I only did a handful of, just friends' resumes, right? This year I've done over 100. I've seen thousands, and I wouldn't have predicted that last year. If you asked me last year, would you do resumes next year? I'd be like, resumes, why? But now it's like something I enjoy doing. But I also figured out how to enjoy it, right? If you told me to do a resume behind the scenes for someone without interacting with them, I wouldn't like it. But I like doing it in front of them, and I like talking to them. I like talking to people. I like interacting with people. And I think especially in high school, it's really good to figure out like what brings you energy and what drains you. Some people like being behind the scenes. Some people like being in front of the scenes. Figure out what that is. And also test, make yourself a little uncomfortable, right? That maybe you're not comfortable talking to people. Maybe you're not but talk a little more, right? And this is what people don't get is the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step, right? People overestimate what they can do in a year, and they underestimate what they can do in like 10, 20 years, right? So they think, oh, I'm going to get so much done over the summer. I'm going to get so much done over the month. I'm going to get so much done before the end of the year. But then they forget, like, you can get a lot done in 5 years. You can get a lot done in 10 years.
Yeah, you can. And that what's one step, you said a couple of things that are really key. What's one step that you can take today that's a little bit uncomfortable? Do you have like a mechanism? How do you know when you're kind of taking a step that's just stretching you enough out of your comfort zone? And how could our kids kind of understand what that feels like?
So let me give like an example. Let's say you're uncomfortable going to like a public event, right? Don't go to the largest public event, right? Don't go like, let's say you have to go, it's going to be like 500 people and you're uncomfortable, or you're afraid of performing. Don't perform in front of 500 people the first time. I mean, you can, but I would not suggest it. Perform in front of 2 people, right? You're uncomfortable interviewing with someone you don't know. Okay. So interview with someone you know first, right? Then interview with someone like casual acquaintance that you don't know that well, and build it up. That's what like a lot of people don't realize, that a lot of people put themselves in situations and they keep on increasing it. So think of like something super uncomfortable and scale it down. There's always some way to scale it down in a way that you are more comfortable.
So what can our kids, right? We're in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah.
And, freshman to senior year in high school, it's hard to get jobs right now. What are some ways that, if they're looking for career opportunities, or they're thinking about next steps, what are some ideas or ways in which they might be able to connect, especially given everything we're facing right now?
So, I mean, social media is a good way to really stay connected, because remember, when I was in high school, it was just kind of starting out. People, like, you didn't really have mobile data, and even the phones, they weren't like, browsing on the phone, like, it was like terrible experience. Another thing that I would say a lot of kids should do is really read and explore. The fact is that just explore so many things. And compared to 10 years ago, podcasts are definitely the way to go. I think listen to podcasts. There are podcasts about any topic you can possibly think of. And I think one thing that I wish I started earlier was listen to podcasts, and that you can be, cleaning your room and listen to podcasts, right? You can be sort of in the middle of something. You can be working out. And I'd really recommend that, and focus on like the emotional intelligence, because, who knows when the pandemic will end, but it'll eventually end, right? And you want to come out with some skills, right? You want to come out thinking like with an action plan. So I would say really think about, and one thing that people really don't, it's hard to learn, is emotional intelligence. So there's a book called Emotional Intelligence 2.0, and the common book of How to Win Friends and Influence People. So I would say focus on the soft skills, right? Focus on like negotiation, selling, because regardless of what you do, you'll always be negotiating in your life in some capacity, whether you're negotiating your job offer, you're negotiating your rent, or even negotiating with your friends. Like, hey, I don't want to go. Like some people don't realize like, hey, I don't want to go to that party. I don't want to go there, or I don't want to do that. How do you negotiate to be like in a way that doesn't make you look like the person that's annoying?
Yeah, that's a great point. I love podcasts.
Yeah.
Podcasts, right? Like in the last 10 years, there's a podcast for everything. Our students listening, you could even start your own podcast. You were on Jordan's podcast. I know
Yeah.
Jordan's 21 and has done like written books, done podcasting and is out there. So there's no limit on that. Do you have top podcasts that you would recommend? What are your favorites?
I mean, what I do is I listen on topics. So the one podcast that I like, and I think some of the topics end up getting really advanced, but I listen to like Marketing Speak by Stephen Spencer. But honestly, what I would recommend is if there's a book you like, oftentimes the author has a podcast, oftentimes. So I kind of listen to there's one, Mastering College to Careers. He's a good friend of mine, Daniel Botero. I really like his podcast just because he just interviews different people. And I would say if there's a person you like, they've probably been on a podcast. If there's someone you look up to, kind of listen to that. So that I won't really name, because that's just not how I kind of do it. I kind of, if I want to learn something, I want to learn marketing, I'll search up marketing, look up the marketing process, listen to that. I want to get better public speaking, I'll listen to a public speaking podcast. I want to get better at podcasting. There's a podcast about podcast advertising. So that's kind of how I'll do it. It's just like search something that you're interested in. And sometimes I'll just listen to topics on like movie reviews or all that stuff. And I know murder mysteries are like the big thing, but
Yeah.
there's history podcasts. I know that and they go really in depth, and it's a great way to just become more knowledgeable and just become a better person.
Yeah, that's a great idea, especially because we always have our phones with us. It's not like back in my day when podcasts first came out about 15 years ago, and we had to plug in and download and get it and carry it on an actual iPod, right?
Yeah.
The search feature, I think what you're saying is search up any topic.
Yeah.
And even I listen to a lot of podcasts when I'm trying to fall asleep. So you can set the timer for 30 minutes or whatever, and it'll play, and then you fall asleep. And even if you just take one nugget out of that pocket, you don't have to listen. You made a great point about reading books, right? If you're not a reader, I buy a ton of books, and I don't read all of them. I don't read the whole book, but if I could take one piece out of there, which in a lot of authors, you're right, with podcasts, they're certainly putting out their content in podcasting.
Yeah. And the other thing is, a lot of people think of like a mistake you've made. There's probably a book that you should have read that would have helped you. And I've seen people make very obvious business mistakes, and it's because they should have read this one book that's like very common. Like, hey, if you start a business, read this book. And it's going to make it, I think, like business wise, there's a book 0 to 1, the E-Myth Revisited. So it's like these type of things. Like I've read books on like content marketing, and that helps me to this day on like LinkedIn. That's how I grew. So just kind of, if there's something, read or listen to a podcast.
So would you say now is the time, given that we've got some downtime, is now the time for, you mentioned it, start social media. What would you recommend to high school students about starting their professional networking? How do they even do that now?
I think first check in your own network. A lot of people don't realize that they have a network regardless of how small, right? Your parents have people, you have the people in your community. And like, for example, I got my first job I got my first job from my dad, right? Like I worked at Popeyes for a summer, and I got like the next job, like I tutored like the neighbors' kids, right? So you'd be surprised. And I know someone who's like a piano tutor, and again, people from the community, and then it starts from word of mouth. So if you want to become like a doctor, ask your parents, do they know a doctor? Or check the local doctors, and then kind of just ask. You'd be surprised at asking like, hey, can I talk to you for 30 minutes on, what you do? Because a lot of kids, they they don't really know what these careers do. They have an idea like what they see on TV, but TV is not an accurate representation. Like they don't show the doctor working on billing and malpractice insurance and all that, right? They just show the doctor doing like the most exciting things that are good for TV. So I would say first start with that. Because, you know, people talk about growing your network, but people don't realize that you have an existing network and you should utilize it. Most people don't even ever utilize that fully.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's why we're doing this career day, virtual career day today, is exactly that, is so that students have an opportunity to talk with individuals in those fields. And what we found as we've been planning is that we have people who are working in business, but they have psychology degrees, or similar to you, you're an entrepreneur who went through a traditional college route, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to use this time again to plug that on your reflection forms today, students, Jonaed is we're going to do a raffle with 3 students who he'll help either on interviewing skills or resume skills. So make sure if you want to have an opportunity to work with him directly, you fill that out and we'll randomly select 3 people.
So
and
you want to hear an interesting story. So one of my friends from college, right? He went to, so Columbia has a master's in financial engineering program, and it's one of the best in the country. Super hard to get in. Like he might have been the dumbest guy in the program. He was very smart, very smart kid, but he might have been the dumbest. Like he had like a Russian physicist, all these people, super PhD people coming in, and you know, but he did well. He worked as a stock trader, and you know, he left his job because he sells pickles. He started So you know, the thing is, it's like, and he started it 2 years ago. It just ended up growing. It was like a passion project. You know, he's always sort of been an artist, and you know, I'm not surprised at all. Like I knew him. And, you know, it was a tough decision, but you just never know. Like, you know, imagine telling someone in that program that he's going to sell pickles one day. They're like, what are you talking about? He's not a farmer, but it's just something he grew out of his basement. So that's what the thing about life is that you never know how things are going to take you. And it adds to his story. Like, hey, I was at a stock trader to selling pickles. And I called him, you know, and again, networking, I saw it on like Facebook. I called him. I was like, hey, what's up? I talked to him for 10 minutes and I ordered 3 jars of pickles. He said it's going to be, you know, take some time. So it's like a month or 2. I'll have some spicy pickles. And it's just funny how these things just turn out.
So you, similar, right? Not similar. I mean, you don't sell pickles, but you did go to, you know, university in actuary science, which, by the way, is super hard and rigorous to get into. It's not like, you know, I certainly couldn't have applied to get into actuary science. Like that never would have happened, right?
I couldn't get a PhD either, so it works out.
That's okay, right? We all have our things. But so you did that, and then your parents. I remember when we were talking about this, you said your parents were pretty strict and had like this vision for what they wanted for you to become or do with your life, right?
Yeah, I mean, my parents are super strict. Like my parents were the type, oh, you got a 95. Oh, why don't you get a 90? Even if I got 100, they're like, oh, why don't you get this extra credit? And it was just one of those things that, but you know, that's all they knew, right? That's all they thought success was, you know, grades and stuff. They still don't know what I do. They're like, he's just stands in front of the computer with this light above his head and he's on Facebook. Does he make money doing that and all that stuff? But, you know, they just don't know. So it's just, but, you know, it did have value, right? Like, you know, I am at a point where it's like, if things hit the wall, right, I can get into a company, maybe like a Google or a Facebook and go back in just because I know someone who works at Google, right? I know a Google recruiter. I have a friend that works at Twitter. I have another friend that works at Microsoft. And again, through networking is made possible, but realize that networking is only one component, right? If you're not smart, they're not going to refer you, right? You still have to be competent and good at what you do.
And they have to know you. The people that you know at Google or wherever, right? They know who you are. They know your character. They know your work ethic. Talk to me a little bit about, though, when you told your parents you were quitting your corporate job to do your own thing.
So at first, let me tell you, I didn't tell them at first because I was working from home. And then, like, they were just like, he's not in front of the computer all day like he used to be. He's like going out. And, you know, eventually I had to tell him because I was hired by my dad's friend. He had to start. He's like a wealthy guy who had a startup. And you know, it's funny. I still help him out, even though I left that job. Like, I'm still involved. Like, he still pays me for some other things. And I kind of told them, and they were like, oh, they're just like, this guy's an idiot. I don't know what I'm going to do. And look, for the first year, I didn't make money, right? I cashed out my retirement. It wasn't much in 2018. And I still live at home. And I made that conscious decision because I was like, look, if I live at home, I can reinvest that money. New York City is expensive. I can invest. That's like $2,000 more that I don't have to worry about, that I can reinvest into my business. And look, 2 years later, it's paid off, right? And now I'm in a very good position where it's like I was able to hire my friend, right? I have a podcast editor, all these things, right? They cost money, right?
Oh my gosh, I love that because so for all the adults watching, and who think that at 18 or 22 or whatever, the kids are leaving, they're not leaving. The trend is they're staying home longer, right? And you're still home and you're owning that, and it's helping you. And for our students who think like, I'm going to be 18 or 22 and then I'm going to be done and I'm moving out, like that's certainly a cultural shift that we're seeing now, right?
Yeah, and look, I'm an immigrant, and it's like you don't leave till you're married. And look, I would have left, but NYC is so expensive. Like the cheapest house is like 800,000, like $1 million, and it's like, yeah, look, money's good right now, but that's still a lot of money, right? You still have to save up and all that, and it just gives you the flexibility that you're going to see a lot of entrepreneurs there. The average entrepreneur is actually over 50 years old, right? Most people start businesses when they're in their 50s because of experience. Their kids are older, they've saved enough money, right? Money is the biggest thing. Or you see these young tech entrepreneurs, and if you look at their backgrounds, right, a lot of them come from wealthy families, or they have a support. It's just so much harder when you have to worry about rent, you have to worry about bills. Look, if I didn't live at home, I wouldn't have been able to quit and go that year without making much money, right? I needed that year of not making much money to get to where I am right now, to where I can, right? And again, I'm thinking about building for the future. I want to invest like 10 to 20,000 in like February in certain things, because I know that'll have a return. But it's those things, you just have to be patient, and it takes time. But by the time I'm 32, 33, I want to be in a position where I have much more than I would have if I did it the other way.
So what's the dream? What's the dream for you?
Dream is just, I want to do just more like podcasting, more of that stuff. Like, I like these things. I like talking to people. I like influencing. I like being able to just help people, like helping these students, right? The 3 people I'm really excited for that. And just, kind of doing like interviews on like TV and all that, more of that, and just being able to impact more people, right? Like my website gets a decent amount of visitors, but just growing the podcast, growing the website, and just kind of really influencing decisions, because a lot of kids, they just really don't, like, I didn't know, right? And I was still better off than the average kid, but there's some kids, they just like, they need some info, right? They need to be able to have some ideas, and I just didn't know a lot about careers. And it's like, now the thing is, at 18, if you start doing the right things, and I did the right things, right? But I could have done more of some of the right things. And you can just make moves. I know like people who are like, 20, 22, right? By the time they're 23, 24, right? It's not like, hey, do I get a job? It's like, where do I work? Mm-hmm. How much do I make, right? Like my cousin, I think he got a job at Facebook. I think his starting was like 120, 130,000, and he got $100,000 signing bonus, but he did the right things, right? He had a bunch of internships and all that. So it's like, be strategic if you want to put yourself, because once you're set at like 22 to 23, then by the time you're 30, oh man, you could have a house, you could have the car you want, you could have whatever you want.
Yeah, but maybe is there a part where you didn't have those things? I think when we were talking, you were saying how you're driving a Honda or you're driving.
Yeah, I'm still driving like a 1999 car.
I drove a 1998 Camry. I'm not even kidding. That had duct tape on it for a while, because my dad pulled the side mirror off moving it, and people were like, "Why aren't you getting a new car?" I drive a minivan now that people make fun of me. I love my minivan. It's paid off. It doesn't cost me. I don't have a car payment.
And, I want to go the other way, that it's okay not to have everything figured out at 22, 23. Like, I come across a lot of people, like even like me, right? Like, I wasn't necessarily successful until like even the last few months, right? Like, I was making money in the beginning of the year, but it's really after the pandemic that like my business like blew up. And it's okay. Like, you don't need to be successful at 20. It's good if it's better. You just have more options, but the road is just very different. I know people who don't really hit it till the 30s or 40s, but when they hit it so big.
And let's talk about what the hit it is, right? Let's talk about what success is. Success is a moving target, and you're constantly, I know for myself, I'm constantly redefining what success means for me. I'm the only one I'm the only one. You're the only one, Jonaed, that can say success for me tomorrow is going to look like this. For me today, success for me today is to get through this interview, to get through this day, and to figure out, then reflect, and how can we do this better next year? That's success for me right now.
And
right?
I really want to reemphasize that is that don't let someone else define success for you. Oftentimes, look, sometimes I see people, they have their parents define, and again, just realize that most people are well-intentioned, but don't let your friends, don't let, other people define success for you, because when you hit it, you just don't, it doesn't mean much. You're like, yeah, this is it. This is like not what I expected. And it's not what you expected because it's not what you truly want. It's not in alignment with who you are and who you want to be.
It's a great point. It really is that internal, that not letting those other people, knowing internally what's right for you and taking that right next step.
Yeah.
I talk a lot about what's the next right step. Maybe you can do 2 steps, the next 2 steps, but what's the next right step?
You never know what the next right step is, but at least step somewhere. You'll make the wrong steps. You'll make a bunch of that, but the wrong steps will help you make the right ones, right? I've made a lot of mistakes. I should have done things differently, but that's everybody. Regardless of what you do, you'll make a lot of mistakes. But it's just mistakes that make you who you are. Just don't keep on making the same mistakes over and over again.
Don't make the same mistake over and over. And when you do, recognize it. Is there one salient, one big idea, one piece of advice? If students walk away with nothing other than this one thing, the most important thing, what would that thing be that you would say, if anything else, think about this? This is one thing you'd hope for them to take away.
Just really, again, that everybody has a different road in life, and it's okay. It's just how life is, right? And if everybody had the same road, life is going to be boring. And just focus on, and some roads are, some people have straighter roads than others. Some people are curvier, some are narrow, some have like dead ends and they make wrong turns. But that's just how life is, right? Life is that you just keep moving forward, right? Keep moving, and your destination will change, right? All the other things will change, and that's okay. Just focus on moving forward, and just realize that, people bounce back, right? I've seen people bounce back from the worst. Have a good support system, be smart about it, and just, grow as a person.
Well, Jonaed, appreciate you being an awesome person, an awesome support person, a great connector. If students want to just learn more about you in general, what are your social media handles?
So, LinkedIn is the best way to kind of sort of find me. So you see the spelling of my name, Jonaed, last name Iqbal. Listen to the podcast, the No Degree podcast. And, it's valuable regardless of whether or not you went to college, because some people went to college and they'll kind of say what they should have done or what they should have. They went for a little and they dropped out, and they kind of talk about why they dropped out. So maybe you don't want to drop out. So you want to figure out what you could have done or what you could have learned. And I think that's sort of the best way to sort of get in touch.
Great. So we've got your contact for our students out there. Remember, when you go through session 1, session 2, session 3, you're going to have a reflection assignment. At the end of that assignment, there's going to be an area for you to indicate if you want to be a part of the raffle. And Jonaed is going to meet with 3 students. We're going to randomly select for you to work with anything that the 3 of you want to work on. And so we just appreciate your time, your effort, and for you taking the time today to be with us and show up here.
You're welcome. The pleasure was all mine.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody. You're going to move on to session 2, your first session, session 1. You're going to go log into your NetBurst account and you're going to join your first session. And we hope that this day gives you at least one nugget that you can take away with you for the rest of your life.